Hello, everyone, and welcome to the India Story, the program that tells you all the big developments in India. And it's really aimed at a global audience to help the rest of the world also understand what is happening in India. And if you were switching on your TV screens and you were trying to figure out what's been happening in India, naturally the scenes in Parliament would have pretty much dominated a lot of coverage for a period of time because many things happened. First of all, there was a security breach. There was an attack that took place inside Parliament with some protesters. And then after that, a fairly unprecedented suspension of a large number of opposition leaders. This after they continued to protest on the floor of the House. They were demanding that the Home Minister made a statement, but that did lead to massive suspensions. And then in a House that was deplete more or less of the opposition, some really important bills were also passed. So if you're scratching your head and trying to figure out what does all of this mean, well, we're going to be telling you on this particular program. We're also going to turn our attention to something else that's been capturing headlines in India, which is COVID and perhaps the return of COVID. Is that something which is at all feasible, at all possible? Well, we're going to be telling you. Randeep Guleria is going to be joining us. He was, of course, the man who led the entire fight against COVID the last time it was here. Probably not any reason to worry right now, but we'll find out from the man himself. And that's also coming up for you on this show. And then, of course, IPL auctions. Well, that's always something that catches a lot of attention. So we're going to be giving you the lowdown on that. So a lot coming up. But let me start by taking you through the headlines that you should have been tracking this week.
146 opposition MPs were suspended from Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as they demanded a statement from the government in the House on the Parliament security breach. The Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha cleared 3 bills aimed at overhauling India's criminal laws. The Lok Sabha passed a bill that regulates the appointment of election commissioners. The Rajya Sabha had already cleared it. The Union Health Ministry asked people to stay alert but not panic as a new strain of COVID-19 was reported in 3 states. Sakshi Malik broke into tears and said she was retiring after Sanjay Singh, a close aide of Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh, was elected as the new president of the Wrestling Federation of India. Australian pacer Mitchell Starc became IPL's most expensive player after Kolkata Knight Riders splurged $2.98 million to buy him. Sameer Rizvi topped the uncapped players list with CSK acquiring him for $1 million.
All right, so before we turn our attention to COVID, let's just turn our attention to everything that's been happening in Parliament. And I'm not going to try and make it into a political slugfest between 2 or 3 people. We are going to be speaking to people across the party lines. Abhishek Manu Singh is going to be joining us. Shehzad Poonawala is going to be joining us. Kancha Laya and others. But let's just try and piece together what's actually happening and what, therefore, some of the consequences and implications there are. And let me start by just taking you through the sequence of events, because this really is how it all started. India's lawmakers had actually united to pay homage to the fallen in remembrance of what had happened in the Parliament terror attack all those decades ago. This is where it started. But hours later, the lower house chamber was filled with yellow-colored, non-toxic gas, and mobile phone videos showed MPs cutting across party lines, bashing up one of the 2 youths who had actually managed to create a security lapse in the country's most secure complex. And this is a new Parliament complex which had even higher security. And those unprecedented scenes obviously ensured a social media frenzy and concern all across the country. The explicit coincidence that this particular intrusion happened on a day when India was remembering one of the saddest days in its parliamentary history, well, that coincidence was not also lost on anybody. And of course, as these images continue to flash and inside both houses of parliament, there was concern and security agencies were trying to make sense of the intrusion. The nation's lawmakers were now busy in verbal duels, and chaos continued. Images of 4 people, 2 of them held by MPs, 2 of them arrested by the Delhi police just outside the new Parliament complex. So all of that continued to happen. But after that, after all of this drama, was when the next level of drama then started to ensue, because the opposition started to demand that the government explain what exactly had happened. And to be more specific, the opposition started to demand that the Home Minister Amit Shah come and make a statement. Now, what happened after that? When no statement was being made, the opposition started to protest in the well of the House with placards, trooping inside, other such things. This is disruption of parliament, which we have seen in the past also, and it's never pretty to see, and there is disruption. But this time what happened was also somewhat unprecedented. A lot of those opposition leaders who were trooping into the well of the House and who were protesting then were suspended. They were suspended across the board. Nearly 150 opposition MPs ended up being suspended. And that was unprecedented, and that led to a lot of questions actually being asked inside and outside. Then two further things happened, which added to the drama around the entire week. Number one, these scenes started to be seen, that opposition MPs protesting outside, protesting on the streets, and that was getting a certain amount of sympathy perhaps for them from some quarters. But then these scenes started to be seen that as the opposition MPs were sitting there outside Parliament, one MP in particular started to mimic the vice president. And that particular video and shots of Congress leader Rahul Gandhi actually filming Kalyan Banerjee, that went viral on social media. That led to its own storm. That led to statements by the vice president, by the prime minister, by the president of India, saying that this is a shocking attack on a constitutional functionary. So that led to its own set of drama and its own set of issues. But let's now just step aside from all that drama to see, where did all of this actually end up? And that is something that we also have to take a look at because of its implication for what could happen in Parliament and parliamentary democracy and what the government should do and what the opposition should do going forward. Because at the end of the day, what all of this resulted in, what started the suspension of 14 MPs on the December the 14th, and it became 78 MPs on December the 18th, and further MPs being suspended. So by the time we are speaking right now, it's about nearly 150 MPs have been suspended. Now, the last time mass suspension at this level happened was in 1989 under the Rajiv Gandhi regime. At that time, it was the Thakkar Commission report on Indira Gandhi's assassination that was creating a storm. And because of that, the opposition erupted in protests in March of 1989. 63 lawmakers eventually were suspended. But the action against them at that time was short-lived because the MPs apologized to Speaker the next day and they were allowed to resume their parliamentary duties. Now, coming back to 2023, none of that has actually happened. The opposition MPs have intensified their protests. Demonstrations are continuing. And now what has happened is that in that opposition-less parliament, with no actual debate and discussion between the government and the opposition, some really critical and crucial bills have actually been passed. On December the 21st, the Lok Sabha has passed a bill to regulate the appointment of the election commissioners. And this, by the way, is a somewhat controversial bill in any case, because you've had the opposition saying that this weakens checks and balances because the Chief Justice is no longer there to decide who the election commissioners are. Instead, there's the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition and a minister appointed by the government. So the government's going to get to decide election commissioners, and what does that do for checks and balances? That's what the opposition has been saying. Rajya Sabha, by the way, has already cleared that bill. And December the 20th, the Lok Sabha cleared the redrafted criminal law bills. Now, as you've been watching the India story, you know our view on this. Reforming the Indian judicial system is perhaps the biggest and the most important item on the agenda for India right now. So those criminal law bills deserve a lot of attention. They deserve debate. They deserve discussion. They've been passed now. That's fine. But could they have been made even better? Should there be changes? And can we get consensus around fixing the judicial system? That's what we would have hoped for. But obviously, if the bills are being passed in a house without the opposition, there will always be some question marks around that. So we'll have to see how that actually plays out at the end of the day. Now, there are two things that are actually happening out here. And as we get our guests in to discuss all of this, there are two slightly separate issues that need to be looked at. One is the politics of it all. Because what the government is saying is that here you have an opposition that was breaching the maryada of parliament. Look at what they were doing on the floor of the house. They were disrupting parliament. They were not allowing it to continue. We have to have bills being passed, and the opposition cannot be allowed to disrupt parliament. That's point number one. And secondly, the government is saying the mimicry of the vice president was something that was unacceptable, and that is something that has to be dealt with. Staying with the politics of it, what is happening on the opposition side is, again, two things. Number one, the entire suspension becomes something that the opposition used to try and put itself together, bring itself together, try and find issues to talk about, to say democracy is in danger. We did have that meeting of the India Alliance where lots of interesting things happened, including one that we will look at in some detail later in the program, the fact that Malik Arjun Kharge was named by at least two opposition leaders as a possible prime ministerial candidate. But aside from that, the entire suspensions became an issue for the opposition to try and reunite and come together after the severe setbacks that we saw in the assembly election, especially for the Congress party. But that's at the political level. Moving away from the political level, something else that all of this does raise some questions about, which have raised to some questions that we need to get answered, is what does that mean for the parliamentary democracy itself and for the system of checks and balances? And I'll tell you why this is something which is being taken seriously by many analysts and experts from the opposition and even from the government, because nobody really wants a situation where you're not having the proper functioning of parliamentary democracy, or for that matter, where the system of checks and balances are in doubt. Why is it important? Well, that should be obvious. Look, the way democracy functions is at multiple levels. Number one is the system of elections. It's great for, any democracy should have a system where you go and you vote, and if you're voting somebody in or you're voting somebody out, then that is being respected. So that's step part one of any democratic process. And let's face it, that's some place where India has never had an issue in its entire history. So that's great. The second aspect of democracy is obviously the concept of individual rights and individual freedoms and the extent to which those are being safeguarded. And it's interesting that, for example, and the role of the criminal justice system in safeguarding that was actually being spoken about very strongly by the government itself on the floor of the House and Parliament. So that's a second aspect of democracy, which is individual rights and individual freedoms. But the third part of a democracy is the entire system of checks and balances and how the executive works and the government works and how that responds to parliament, and what is the role that the judiciary plays in all of this, and what is the role of the media and all of this. And that is the institutional framework that goes behind a democracy. So if you end up in a situation like we're seeing right now, and look, we can keep on debating who's to blame. I can tell you the opposition would say the government is to blame, the government would say the opposition is to blame. But whichever way you look at it, if you end up in a situation where parliament is not functioning quite as well as it should, or that checks and balances, there are questions around, and are things not working perfectly, then that does lead to certain concerns. And you do need to try and find an answer to that. And why this is important, before we get into the politics of all of this, let's just speak to somebody who's been the Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, who can tell us why these checks and balances are important and how we can actually try to get Parliament to function in a better manner. So let's talk to him, and then we'll turn our attention to some of the politics. All right, we now have with us Mr. Achari, who's a former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, 14th Lok Sabha, a little bit of the 15th Lok Sabha as well. So Mr. Achari, thank you so much for joining us. These fairly unprecedented scenes that we have seen in Parliament over the last 1 week, I want to just get your sense first on how you react to this. What do you make of what's been happening in Parliament?
No, this is, as you put it, is very unprecedented, because members have been suspended. A very large number of them have been suspended. And when they are out of the House, so many bills, and that too bills of very great importance. The bills which are making very large number of amendments on almost replacing the IPC, CRPC, and Evidence Act and all that. Such bills of momentous importance are being passed when the opposition is practically out of the House because of the large-scale suspension of members. This is something which I have never seen, and it is quite unprecedented in the history of the Lok Sabha, of course, except one instance I can quote, that is in 1989, when about 63 members were suspended from the House.
So, Mr. Acharya, you have a situation where nearly 150 members ended up getting suspended, which is virtually the entire opposition. And then in that situation, you're actually having bills being passed, which means, again, by definition, those bills are not really being debated and discussed that much. So this presumably is not something that is desirable, and we should try and find a way to get around it. Have you ever seen such scenes in the past? The government will be blaming the opposition blames the government. Between those extremes, how do you move forward in a situation like this?
Well, you see, as a former Secretary General, I can say that whenever such occasions arise, there is a demand. When there is a demand from the opposition and the government is not willing to oblige and things like that, so naturally there will be a stalemate and protest and all that. But then there is a way out of this. You know, if the government is serious, the opposition is willing to respond, then there can be a meeting. In fact, the Prime Minister or the senior minister from the government can call a meeting of all the opposition leaders and discuss matters with them and find an amicable settlement. So that is the way. That is the way Parliament has functioned earlier. I mean, at least I have been there since 1970.
So, Mr. Acharya, is there a fear that, look, there could be a point somewhere in the future that you could have a situation where the entire opposition just gets suspended, and then some major bills are passed, some constitutional amendments end up getting passed, and they get passed because there's no opposition there to actually be able to vote against it. Now, okay, I'm painting a doomsday scenario, but in light of what we've often seen, in light of what we've seen right now, are those the sort of concerns that could actually happen? And if you don't want that to happen, irrespective of who's in power, it's not this government or that government, whoever is in power, that's not a situation that we would ever want to happen. How do you make sure that that can never happen in the future? How do you maintain those checks and balances?
Well, that is a possibility. Looking at what is happening in Parliament these days, one can certainly conclude that maybe at some future date, this is going to happen. In fact, it is happening. The opposition, practically the opposition is out of the House. And then all these various important bills are being passed. There is something very, very unusual about it. That is all I can say.
All right. Well, given the levels of confrontation, I'm not sure that anyone's really talking to each other right now. So any solution that you have in mind, how do you move forward from here?
See, all solution is there. The only thing is that you must grasp it. That is it. See, the point is that after all, it's a democratic country and it is a democratic house. And here, through democratic means, you must find solutions to issues. I don't think there is any issue which cannot be resolved through discussion and debate, provided there is a willingness or there is a proper attitude on both sides.
All right, Mr. Acharya, thank you so much for joining us with that.
Thank you.
All right, let's now turn our attention to the politics of it all as well. What exactly is happening, and in particular, whatever's happening in Parliament, how could that have been avoided, and what's the best way to go forward? We're going to be joined by Shahzad Poonawala in just a couple of minutes as well. But Dr. Abhishek Manu Singh is joining us, constitutional expert, top lawyer, and also, of course, closely affiliated to the Congress party. Dr. Singhvi, what we have been seeing in Parliament is clearly disturbing. It's sad that bills are being passed with the entire opposition missing because our nearly 150 MPs have been suspended. But the government will also say that the opposition has been disrupting Parliament, trooping into the well of the House, mimicking the Vice President. So the opposition is also to blame.
Vikram, let's just step back for a minute. It's a far larger and a more important issue than is made out in all this petty politics. There is, of course, an important constitutional aspect, but I'll come to that later. Let's look at contextually in the political aspect. What is the sequence, Vikram? you have a unprecedented security breach, unprecedented not because of the result of what happened that day, God and fate and good luck saved us, but what might have happened on that breach. A canister in it could have been a bomb, could have been anything. So on that step 2, we ask for something which is the most innocuous and ridiculously simple, obvious, and obligatory thing to ask for in a functioning democracy, unless you are a kind of a auto mode pilot democracy. We say the Home Minister and the Prime Minister, or one of them at least, must give a statement on this breach. Number 3, on that, there is absolute and total mulish obstinacy for over a week. The same gentlemen are speaking in media, in channels, at Varanasi, at Surat, at functions, but they refuse to come and speak in the House. Step 4, people go in with placards after 4 or 5 days of demanding it. And yes, placards are not permitted, but is it the first time, Vikram, you or the country has seen placards in the House? In the last 70 years, 7 years, 7 months, or 7 days, is it the first time you've seen it? Now, when you go there, an excuse is brought up that placards are not allowed, we will suspend you. You start with a batch of 40, becomes 80, becomes 142 or 148 at final count. All of this happens unrelated to, much before, anything to do with the so-called mimicry incident.
Dr. Singhvi, let me just...
both ways.
All right, I'm going to get others and also to discuss some of the constitutional answers. But let me just quickly ask you one last question on the politics of all of this, right? Because the politics of all of this is playing itself out when the India alliance was also having a meeting. You've been trying to get the opposition unity. Does something like this unite the opposition further? Does it make the opposition feel that there's no hope because we're not likely to have power? And incidentally, there was also this entire question thrown up at the India Alliance, and I'm going to try and get others in on the concept of let's have a Mallikarjun Kharge as a uniting figure for the entire opposition. So what's the politics?
That's a lot of questions. Give me a couple of minutes. First of all, it does unite because the indignation is righteous, it is correct, and it cuts across the political spectrum. I dare say, Vikram, that if you were to ask in private, 50% of BJP members would say this is not parliamentary democracy was run. It is not the first time a BJP government has come. It's not the first time a non-Congress government has been there. There have been governments. There have been the whole core of parliamentary democracy is magnanimity. It is trust. It is give and take. It is compromise. It is talks. It is communication. These are things which are not tangible and quantifiable, and hence we try to ignore them. But according to me, this is the heart of parliamentary democracy. And prime ministers from Vajpayee to Vishwanath Pratap Singh, to Devagowda, to others have practiced it. Forget Congress. Now, the other question you are asking is, and remember, do not try and be digressed or diverted by this completely cheap tactics of bringing in the mimicry incident, about which the member concerned, Mr. Banerjee,
this you said.
This was well before. Now,
I'm just trying to move from this into the
about the Kharge thing, and that's the last point you asked me. Let me say very clearly, it must be understood that the person himself, Mr. Kharge, has given the perfect answer. He has himself addressed. So where's the question of me addressing it? Why are we counting our chickens before we hatch? Let us make them hatch first. Let's get the numbers. And then there is complete unanimity that we will decide in a convivial, congenial atmosphere. This is a view expressed in a free and frank discussion, no doubt. And this is, let me tell you, it's a view warmly expressed. It's a view not out of animus or out of malafide. But that doesn't mean that this here and now we must decide, because this is what, on the negative sense, the BJP would like to do, to try and set the cat amongst the pigeons, create confusion, create divisiveness. That is not the issue at all.
Okay, fine. Dr. Singhvi, thank you so much for joining us. Well, while the entire politics of the suspension and what's actually happened in Parliament continues to play out, let's not forget there was also a meeting of the India Alliance that took place on the sidelines of all of that. The opposition parties continuing to try and get together. That after a clear setback that they've obviously faced after the drubbing that the Congress party got in the state elections and the really strong performance of the BJP, other than Telangana, which the Congress won. Now, at that India Alliance meeting, there was a lot of discussion as to the path forward, and there was certainly some conversation about the fact that seat sharing agreements have to be put together and some sort of steps in that direction have to be done by the end of the year. And we'll keep watching that and seeing how that pans out. But something else happened at that India Alliance meeting, which got a lot of the headlines and a lot of attention. That was Mamata Banerjee and Arvind Kejriwal coming out and saying, why don't we make Malik Arjun Kharge, the Congress president, why don't we have him as the prime ministerial face? Now, interestingly, Mr. Kharge himself said, hang on, it's too early to do any of this. We should first wait to see if we're going to actually win enough MPs to be able to form a government. Let's first win the election and then decide who the prime ministerial face should be. And even the others in the opposition seem to have stepped back a little bit and said, all right, we can discuss this later. But a very interesting round of conversations then started. Why was this even put forward as a suggestion? Some people said, well, it's not a bad idea. Maybe this was a way for Mamata Banerjee and Arvind Kejriwal to sort of push Rahul Gandhi aside a little bit. They and others in the opposition alliance may not want it to be a Modi versus Rahul Gandhi battle. Maybe there's some in the opposition who are okay with the Mallikarjun Kharge because he's a senior figure, but they're not necessarily okay handing over that leadership to Rahul Gandhi. So all of those are permutations and combinations and dynamics that were discussed at great length, and we'll have to see what finally happens at the end of the day. But one of the conversations that started on the side, and I'm about to get a guest to help us understand this, was the entire concept that, hey, it would be a good idea for the opposition and the India Alliance to put up Mallikarjun Kharge because he's a Dalit leader, a very prominent Dalit leader, and he would be the first, Dalit leaders actually out there potentially to become the first, Dalit prime minister of the country. And that might lead to a certain consolidation of Dalit votes and maybe ST votes behind the opposition. But that at least is the theory that they are putting out. Well, let's face it, it's not that the Dalit vote or the ST vote has been going strongly behind the opposition. There's been a lot of if you look at the seat breakup, many of the reserved seats, even the last assembly election, actually went with the BJP. But would there be any such consolidation in any case if somebody like Mallikarjun Kharge was prime ministerial face? Well, let's get Dr. Kancha Elaya in, who's somebody who's been a very articulate voice of the Dalits and activist who's been speaking about more and more political power to the Dalits for a long period of time. Dr. Kancha Elaya, I just wanted to get your sense of it. If Mallikarjun Kharge was actually to be the face in some way for the India Alliance, it's not a done deal. He himself says don't do it. He's obviously got sensitivities with Rahul Gandhi and the others in the opposition may not agree. And besides, makes a very valid point. Let's first win the election before you start deciding who the prime ministerial face should be. But do you think it would lead to Dalit consolidation?
No, Vikram, the situation now is that if the India Alliance properly shares their seats and then fights the BJP, particularly in North India, there are only two possibilities to fight BJP, even in North India, and try to reduce at least BJP to the single largest party from the majority that it is for the last two elections. One, that the Congress and the rest of the regional parties have to project either a Shudra OBC or a Dalit as prime minister, because Narendra Modi himself went on talking about his OBC background and garnering a lot of OBC votes along with the Dalit votes. Now, to weaken the BJP, they have to win at least 60 to 65 seats in Uttar Pradesh. That is the
chances of the opposition, just to interrupt you, the chances of the opposition winning 60 to 65 seats in UP is really unlikely. Most people are thinking the BJP is going to get 60 to 70 seats in UP without a problem.
No,
especially Mayawati is not there. So even if the opposition had a Dalit face,
that is the assessment maybe of the surveys and so on. But once a proper alliance is formed there with Akhilesh Yadav, and then the Shudra, OBC, Dalit communities turn to India Alliance where Akhilesh Yadav is the leading force, naturally BJP's assessment will go wrong and more votes will come.
But can I just ask you the leading question in that is, if you look at the last few elections, large sections of the Dalits are actually voting for the BJP. They seem to have a lot of confidence in Narendra Modi's leadership and they seem to be voting for him. If there was to be a Dalit face at the head of the India alliance, why do you really believe that the Dalits will swing from supporting the BJP to supporting the other candidate?
No,
To a large extent.
Dalits just may not change their vote base at one go because there is Mallikarjun Kharge who is a Dalit. But Mallikarjun Kharge is a very, very tactful, capable leader, and Dalit face is one aspect of him, but he is from the Congress, Nehru family background. That will definitely a major political agenda for the India alliance to keep on talking BJP, Modi, and others, and then changing the electoral strategy is quite significant.
So, Dr. Lai, we'll have to see what they finally come up with, but we'll keep coming back to you and getting more and more updates on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vikram.
All right, so we've heard a couple of views, right? We did hear Abhishek Manu Singhvi right now talking about the fact that he thinks what's happening is, not having the opposition when bills are being passed is bad for democracy. We've just heard Kancha Elaya talking about the potential of Dalit consolidation behind the India alliance, if indeed Mallikarjun Kharge is declared their candidate. But let's get a reaction to all of that from Shehzad Poonawala of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which, look, let's face it, whatever you're talking about the India alliance and the rest of it, I think, as you can see from that smile on Shehzad's face, the BJP right now very clearly feels that it's so far ahead and so much of a pole position that all of this is just, talk in the air, if you like. But Shehzad, let me just ask you. I'm going to come to what's happening in Parliament, but before that, what I was just discussing with Kancha Elaya, this entire possibility, India alliance naming Mallikarjun Kharge as the face and therefore Dalit consolidation behind the India alliance. Do you think that's a possibility? Is it something that the BJP would be concerned about?
First of all, Vikram, it has not been officially announced by the India alliance itself, except for a couple of partners, Mamata Banerjee and Arvind Kejriwal. And with what intent they had proposed this name is also circumspect, because I think there were two kinds of shairis that came out of the India Alliance meeting. One set of shairis were being said by Nitish Kumar ji, हजारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पर दम निकले, जितने निकले मेरे अरनान, फिर भी कम निकले. That means he was feeling like it was a lost opportunity and he was very upset with it. And the second set of shairi was by Congress party कि प्यास गजब की लगी थी, बगल में जहर भरा पानी भी था, पीते तो मर जाते, नहीं पीते तो मर जाते. It is a catch-22.
I'm going to try and decipher all of that for a global audience, right? So just to help them understand this, let's just see what the connotation in that are, because that might affect whatever discussions are happening in the India alliance now. From the Congress party's point of view, you feel that putting up Mallikarjun Kharge, in a sense, implicitly means that they're not putting up Rahul Gandhi. And so therefore, there are people in the Congress party who would not be happy with that. Although Mallikarjun Kharge may be able to bind the opposition together better and may even get the Dalit vote.
Well, what is coming out is that it is a sure shot, no confidence motion passed against Rahul Gandhi and his leadership despite Bharat Jodo Yatra by the likes of Mamata Banerjee and Arvind Kejriwal. In fact, Arvind Kejriwal's leaders after leader have said that Rahul Gandhi is a liability. Priyanka Kakkad, Raghav Chadda, they said it on record. So clearly, where does it leave Rahul Gandhi? Point number one. Therefore, the Congress is not accepting it themselves. Now, coming to the aspect of the Dalit factor. Vikram, Mr. Kharge has been the president of the Congress. What difference did he make to the Dalit vote in Rajasthan? It's come to us. In Madhya Pradesh, it's come to us. In Chhattisgarh, although the tribal vote is a bigger factor there, it's come to us. The Congress party has been essentially somebody who has lost the Dalit vote because of their treatment of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, defeating him in 2 elections, not giving him the Bharat Ratna for decades, the manner in which they've ignored Dalits, the way they've treated the OBC and the Dalits in their own party. Many people have left, right from Babu Jagjeevan Ram, had once upon a time, you know what kind of relations he had with the Congress party. So all of that, people have not forgotten. And today the Bharatiya Janata Party has the biggest set of MPs from the Dalit community. We made Ramnath Kovind the President of India in 2017. We now followed it up with Adivasi President. We had an OBC Vice President. So I think people can see through these designs of the Congress.
All right, Chandra, let's just, we'll be sitting and discussing state by state a lot on the elections and in the build-up to 2024. But I want to turn to what happened in Parliament, this week. And there are some people who will feel that it's not a good day. Very important bills like, election commission, like the criminal bills, which are potentially path-breaking bills, if they're being passed in a situation where there's no opposition, then is that a good thing for democracy? That, bills are being passed and there's no opposition there?
No, first and foremost, the onus of running Parliament depends on every member of Parliament. It is as much as the duty of the government as it is the duty of the opposition, said the great Manmohan Singh. I mean, unless the Congress party and Dr. Singhvi have now cast away Dr. Manmohan Singh entirely because they keep quoting.
But when Dr. Manmohan Singh used to say that, I remember Sushma ji and Arun ji and others used to say it's the responsibility of the government to run Parliament.
Absolutely. In what context was that said? Vikram, you would remember because you were covering these issues in great detail. The Supreme Court had cancelled 122 licenses of telecom companies. And in the aftermath of that, a discussion was being asked. Then it was said by Arun Jaitley, and never did Arun Jaitley or Sushma Swaraj, both of whom you covered and you had great relations with, ever ran into the well of the House or mocked or mimicked the Vice President's chair. By the way, Vikram, you must have been quite young at the time when the emergency was imposed and the entire opposition was thrown into jail. Did the likes of Mr. Vajpayee, Mr. Modi, Mr. Jaitley ever mimic the chair or ever break any rule or make fun of constitutional positions? Therefore, in today's context, look at the trend from 2018 onwards, Vikram, and just indulge me for 30 seconds. In 2018 end, they wanted discussion on price rise. We say, let's come have a discussion on price rise, even though elections are in 2019. They run away and go to Rafale. Rafale, the Supreme Court is settling the matter. Despite that, they keep hijacking the House on Rafale. Thereafter, there is COVID. On COVID, they want a discussion. We say, let's have a discussion on COVID. They run on to Pegasus. Pegasus, the Supreme Court comes out with the verdict. They keep running on to another issue called BBC and Adani, Hindenburg. On that too, the courts have come out with the verdict. They go on to Manipur. They say, let's have a discussion on Manipur. We say, let's have a discussion on Manipur. They say 267 PM must reply, even though there's no scope for PM to open the debate in 267. And when Manipur discussion is happening under no confidence, they run away without listening to the reply of Prime Minister. And then they sit for the Delhi Services Bill. Who is running away from Parliament? Who is making it a forum for disruption, not discussion?
But let me just come to one of the key points that was being made earlier. Because, okay, look, we can keep arguing and debating who's responsible, what exactly happened, whose fault is it. But from the point of view of democracy in general, where is this going to lead to? Because if you're going to have a situation, BJP is in power right now, may well be in power after 2024, maybe there'll be another date when somebody else is in power. If you're ending up having a situation where MPs are not going to be there and then bills are going to be passed, then there is an issue around checks and balances. Is that something which we as a country should be concerned about and maybe try and find some solution to it? Today it's happening with these people in opposition, the BJP in power. Tomorrow it could be the other way around. But the principles at stake out here, is that something that we should all sit and worry about a little bit?
Fundamentally, I completely agree. I think that Parliament should be a forum where you cast away partisan political interests and you put national interests first. And therefore, Parliament should become the preeminent forum for you to have a civilized discussion like we are having on your platform. These discussions should actually be held in Parliament ideally. And as much as I agree that it can't be the might of the majority in Parliament, because Parliament is essentially a house to demand accountability of the government, also it can't be the hostage of the tyranny of a minority. The minority can't say that because people have rejected us, we will now behave like errant school children. We will break every rule and law. We will not stick to what we agree in the BAC. And we will then come and use Parliament as a forum to grab attention and eyeballs and to say that my way or highway. Vikram, there has to be a middle ground, and the onus is as much on the government as it is on the opposition.
All right, Shahzad Punabara, thank you for joining us. And I think the fact that we should try and find, in the interest of India and Indian democracy, a way to be able to have these discussions in a meaningful manner and with the checks and balances, I think that's something which hopefully we all agree is the correct path going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you for your time.
All right, so that's all that's been happening in Parliament now. Let's just quickly take you through some of the major headlines across the world that are focused on India. We always do this as a regular segment. What's the global media saying about India? And obviously, a lot of the attention was on that big interview that Prime Minister Narendra Modi did with the Financial Times. This is what the global media was saying about India.
Prime Minister Modi discussed the growing relationship with the US in an interview with the Financial Times. He also responded to claims that he represents a threat to democracy. The Financial Times called him a leader with populist leaning and a flair for discarding the trappings of India's colonial past. The interview also covered India's achievements in the past year. Wall Street banks have forecast that India will continue its ascent in 2024, as per Nikkei Asia report on December 20th. The report said market analysts expect China to settle into a more moderate growth phase and India to continue its ascent as a new powerhouse in 2024, while a fresh economic landscape takes shape after a post-pandemic reshuffle. India's exports face a shortfall of about $4 billion to $5 billion this year after it clamped curbs on trade in wheat, rice and sugar, Reuters reported on December 21st, adding that Red Sea attacks may also hit basmati rice shipments. New Delhi may consider an alternate route along Africa for shipments of basmati rice if attacks by Yemen's Houthi group persist, which could lift prices by about 15 to 20%, Reuters reported, quoting sources. The alternate route may also affect India's exports of the long grain rice to Egypt and Europe.
But before we go any further, let's now turn our attention to something that has been capturing a lot of headlines. COVID is back. At least those are some of the scary headlines you see. Others say that, look, COVID will keep on being around. It's an endemic form. Why on earth are you panicking? New variant or no new variant? There's nothing dramatic that is happening. So I'm hearing two different points of view. Let's try and hear from the real expert what the actual truth of the matter is, what the facts are. And who better to talk to than Dr. Randeep Guleria, who, of course, we all remember as the person who led India's entire fight against COVID in those ghastly years of 2020, 2021. Well, Dr. Guleria, it is 2023, and yet again, there is this new COVID scare that seems to be circulating, a new variant. Just tell us, we want to hear it from the expert. Should we be worrying? Should we not be worrying?
No, I don't think we should be worried, but we should be vigilant. COVID-19 has been there now for more than 3 years, and we've seen waves in the past. But since November of 2021, we've had Omicron and its sublineages only. We haven't seen any new variant emerge like we saw in the early days when we had Alpha, Beta, Delta, and then we had the Omicron. So Omicron is now, the virus is now stabilized to some extent, has become a milder form. But obviously, to survive, the virus will continue to mutate and develop immune escape mechanisms so that it can infect more and more people. But because of the inherent immunity that we have, we will see more of mild cases. But those who are at high risk, the elderly, those who have comorbidities, can at times get a more severe illness. And that we see every year with influenza and other viral infections. So COVID has become like a flu-like illness with severe illnesses in a small group of people. And that's why we need to be vigilant. But it's not that we're going to have another pandemic or anything like that.
So, okay, you said some very important things there. I'm just going to try and get that to explain because a lot of people are concerned they need to hear this. So number one, you said that COVID has now reached that sort of an endemic form, like a flu, everyone gets flu every year. A lot of people get flu, a lot of people get colds. They're not necessarily panicking about it unless you're at high risk. So you're saying that's what COVID is now, and people will get COVID. You've got to say, all right, fine, we've got it. Take the precautions, move on, rest for a while, move on. But it's not necessarily something which you need to panic about anymore. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. But like I said, the high risk group need to be more careful. We see that with influenza also. We'll see that with COVID also. They need to make sure that they've been vaccinated, and they also need to take all the precautions in terms of wearing a mask if they go to a crowded area, regular hand washing, and to avoid coming in contact with someone who has fever, cough, and cold. Because if they get the infection, there's a chance that because of their immunity being low, the infection can be more severe.
So if you're not at high risk for the general public, should you be wearing masks and worrying about going into crowded places or not that much right now? You have to just get on with your life.
So I think you have to, I would say that it's not that something that you must definitely do, but if you're wanting to be extra cautious, it's worthwhile to wear a mask if you're going in a crowded place. Remember now, this is the holiday season. So you'll have people traveling, people will come, there will be crowds in the market. And therefore, there is a chance of the virus spreading from one person to the other, because as you travel, you'll carry the virus with you to a new place. And as you go into a crowded area, especially when it's indoor because of the temperature being cold, you can spread the infection to more people. And that's why we will see a little bit of increase in number of cases, but they will be predominantly mild cases with the flu-like illness.
When you look at the question of vaccination and boosters and whether that should be done, again, this is some area where I'm hearing some confusion. Should you keep getting boosters? There have been, of course, questions about the vaccine itself. Or do you think by now everyone has some basic level of innate immunity, so more boosters and more vaccinations aren't really required?
So we do have some degree of innate immunity, but the older age group and the high risk group, the immunity will tend to wane over a period of time. So there are two important things to remember. One is that the vaccine has evolved, the virus has evolved from what it was, the Wuhan strain, to now the Omicron strain. So there has been multiple mutations in the virus, so that the vaccine which were made for the Wuhan strain may not be that effective for the current strain, because the virus itself has mutated. It's undergone a process of antigenic drift. The second important thing to remember is that in many people, because of immunity being low, the antibodies against the infection will tend to wane over a period of time. They will not go away, so they will still give some protection, but it's not that you are protected as you were when you got yourself vaccinated in the beginning. So because of that, it's important that high-risk group or the people who are the elderly people do get themselves vaccinated, but the important issue is which vaccine to take. So I personally feel that we should now start looking at new vaccines which are covering the current circulating strain, rather than giving a vaccine which was made for the older strain, which was prevalent at that point in time. So it's important for us to keep on, like we do for the flu shot. Every year we have a new vaccine for the flu before winter, which covers the current circulating strain, and that is what we advise every year as a flu shot. So we may land up in such a situation for COVID also.
But the protocol as of now, while all of this is sorted out, if somebody has been vaccinated twice with Covishield, which I think most of the people have got right now, what should they be doing right now? Do nothing? Try and find another booster? What should they be doing?
So if you got yourself vaccinated, including the booster dose, then as of now, you should not do anything. You should just, your immunity is good enough. But one should hopefully wait for, if there is a new vaccine which comes, which covers the current circulating strain, then one should try and get that, especially the high risk and the elderly group.
Right. One last question, Dr. Guleria. When it comes to the questions around, like you said, the virus is now mutated into Omicron, which is certainly more benign than something like Delta was when it first hit. Do you think this is it? The way viruses normally mutate, they get to this level where they can live in an endemic form? Or would you still be worried about a fresh mutation that makes it a killer again?
So this is a new virus, so we need to see how it evolves. And that's why I said we need to be vigilant. But if you go by what happens normally, the virus sort of tries to set a balance with the host, that is the humans. And it would try and get a balance that it continues to survive, but it causes mild illness, so that the host is also there and the virus is also there. So that is type of a balance that has now been achieved. COVID will stay. It will keep causing some infection in humans, and that's how the virus will continue to survive as far as it is concerned. But the only part is that can this virus, or does this virus have the potential to later on undergo major mutations, which can lead to it becoming more lethal, causing more severe disease? as of now, since November 2021, it's not happened. So it seems that we have reached a stage where it probably may not happen, but we need to be vigilant. And that is why very good aggressive surveillance, both community-based and hospital-based surveillance is required. Because if you see a spike in admissions, if you see a spike in people who are coming into the ICU and they are turning out to be COVID positive, then you need to be very careful as to what is happening. Has the virus mutated into a more severe form?
All right. So you look at the hospitalization. Otherwise, general testing is not required, you feel like, they just got a cough and a cold and I might have COVID. This thing. You don't really need to worry about going off and getting tested that often.
Yeah, so it will become like a common cold, and therefore probably if you are having symptoms which are causing breathing difficulty, or in the older age group you have associated chronic diseases like diabetes, respiratory diseases, then it's worthwhile to get yourself tested. Because if you are positive for COVID, then you can take an antiviral drug. We have drugs available both for COVID and for influenza, and therefore that will help you in terms of getting a milder disease. But in the younger age group, it is going to behave like a simple flu-like illness.
All right, Dr. Gureria, thank you so much. That makes it really, really clear. Be vigilant, but don't panic and don't worry too much. COVID has probably mutated into a more benign form. Thank you so much. I think that's something.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gureria. And before we go, it was the week when the auctions took place for the IPL. What happened out there? Who were the big winners? Who were the big losers? And by the way, some of the prices that people got right now, did it leave some of those who were snapped up last year, year before last, and therefore might have slightly lower salaries? Did it leave them scratching their heads a little bit on seeing some of the price tags that people are getting now? Well, here's our special on what happened at the IPL auction.
Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins, the architects of India's World Cup downfall, exactly a month before the IPL auction, emerged as the mega stars of the bidding contest. Kolkata Knight Riders and Sunrisers Hyderabad shelled out a staggering $2.98 million and $2.48 million respectively, making them the highest paid players in IPL history. But this record-smashing spree has sparked a fiery debate over the disparities within the league. The imbalance is striking. Take the example of Rinku Singh, the next big thing in Indian cricket. He was retained by KKR for a mere 55 lakhs. Compare that to Starc's enormous contract. It raises questions. Is it fair for overseas players to out-earn their Indian counterparts in a tournament called the Indian Premier League? A number of uncapped players, however, struck gold. Sameer Rizvi, Shah Rukh Khan, Kumar Kushagra and Shivam Dubey now carry the weight of millions, showcasing the IPL's commitment to nurturing new talent. Yet, when comparing their contracts to Rinku Singh's, one can't help but question the fairness of the IPL's current payment structure. If Rinku Singh had been up for the auction, he might have attracted numerous bids and a much higher salary. The IPL currently lacks a mechanism to adjust the retained players' compensation based on their performance, a glaring oversight. Let's also not forget the massive disparity between men's and women's cricket. The entire purse for a women's Premier League side pales to what the Chennai Super Kings paid for Daryl Mitchell alone. It's a stark reminder of the gender gap in the sport. As we celebrate the IPL's meteoric rise, let's not lose sight of the need for balance, a level playing field where talent, regardless of gender or nationality, is valued equally. The IPL is a success story, but it's also a story still being written.
And that's all we have time for on this episode of the India Story. We'll be back again next week with all the big headlines from India and the big experts to help you understand them. For the moment, goodbye.